Two of Kaijuly 2023 here on Monster Kid Radio. Scratch that. It's Kaiju Kid Radio, and this month we're talking about nothing but kaiju here on the show. But there are some things that we do here that, we kind of keep things going the way we normally do, like kicking off every episode of the podcast with a cool song from a cool surf band, and this time around we're playing the song Damage Report. It is from the band Strange Waters. They are a surf band based out of Fort Wayne, Indiana. You can find them at strangewaters.bandcamp.com. Check out their self-titled album, Strange Waters, when you're done listening to this episode of Monster Kid Radio. I did it again, Kaiju Kid Radio. My name is Derek M. Cook, your writer, host, and producer of the show, and I'm so excited this time around. I'm excited every week. Y'all know that. You guys are probably getting tired of hearing me say that I'm so excited, but this week I'm especially excited because this is something that's been a long time coming. Ultraman. Y'all know I love me some Ultraman. We love Ultraman here at Monster Kid Radio, or Kaiju Kid Radio, or whatever you want to call it. We love Ultraman, and one of the reasons why we love Ultraman is all the cool monsters, and this week, this episode of the podcast in Kaijuly, I thought would be a perfect time to finally pull the trigger and bring Mark Matzke and Anthony Wendel to the show to talk about our top 3 favorite kaiju from the Ultraman franchise. It's a roundtable discussion. It's a top 3 episode. It's a lot of fun. I had a blast recording the conversation with Mark and Anthony, and I had just as much fun going back in and editing the conversation with Mark and Anthony. I hope you have fun listening to the conversation with Mark and Anthony and, well, me. Now, this episode was recorded before the debut of the brand new Ultraman series. It does come up during our conversation, but we don't really talk too much about it because there really wasn't anything to say about it. But I will tell you this, that I have since watched it with Beth. We sat down and we watched it just last night as of this recording in Japanese with the English subtitles, and with the exception of there being a bit more commercials than I remember there being on the official Subaraya Productions Ultraman YouTube channel. It was pretty cool. I had a really good time with it. I really, really like the look of the new Ultraman, Ultraman Blazar. I love the look of him. Traditionally, Ultraman is very symmetrical. This is the first time that I remember seeing an Ultraman that is asymmetrical, and I don't want to ruin it. I mean, I think it's something that Ultraman fans already know if you've seen any of the promotional material, that sort of thing. In fact, I kind of wish I didn't know going into it in one of the commercials leading up to the reveal of Ultraman in this new series, what he was going to look like, because there's a really cool series of shots when Ultraman first appears on screen, and he's kind of, I don't want to say he's peeking, but he's looking around a building, and you only see one half of his face, and then the reveal happens, and you see that, oh no, he's not symmetrical. There's something else going on here, and it looks really cool. There have been some complaints of some of the grunting that happens during the fights. Somebody referred to it as Zoidberg grunting sounds. I don't know if I'd go that far, but I will say I probably don't need nearly as much, but we are talking about a guy who just turned into Ultraman for the first time. I'd probably be making all sorts of noises myself if I suddenly found myself transforming into Ultraman and fighting something. I'd probably be doing more than just grunting, just saying. I had a blast watching it, and this is how I know the show was a success. Beth said she'll watch the next episode with me. She seemed to enjoy it as well. The kaiju they fight looked really cool. It just really was awesome. It seemed to have more of a mature edge than some of the other Ultraman series that have happened relatively recently, and I'm here for it, man. I can't wait to see what happens in episode 2. I did mention that I was watching this on Facebook, and some people didn't know how I was watching it. It's on YouTube, officially. Now, I did mention this in the recording with Mark and Anthony, but seriously, Ultraman is available for us to watch on YouTube for free. Yes, you have to sit through a bunch of Japanese commercials, but that just kind of lends to the experience, I feel like. Except, like I said, I feel like there were too many commercials this time around, and they weren't necessarily organically placed. This is not a YouTube ads thing, so if you're paying for that YouTube whatever to avoid ads, you're not going to get around it. These are hard embedded into the video itself, and they, again, don't feel like they're organically placed in that the screen doesn't fade to black and then we go to commercial. It just seems like every 10 minutes or so, they drop the commercial in. So I suppose technically, and actually I have to thank my stepdaughter for this because she just walked in and reminded me of this, you could physically fast forward through it if you want to. So that is an option. But it was still kind of cool to see the Japanese commercials and to find out that, boy, I really got to get to Japan one of these years because they do a huge Ultraman celebration, stage show, convention. Looks like they're doing a big Subaraya Imagination celebration. That just looks awesome. Someday, man, I got to get out to Japan for this. I got to get my Ultraman on. But in the meantime, we've got this week's episode of the podcast where we're going to talk about our top 3 favorite kaiju from the Ultraman franchise. And Mark Matzke doesn't know how to take a break. He's got his beta capsule review coming up, and we're going to get to all of that right about now.
Human is the fantastic motion picture record of the search for the mountain creature of Asia, whose name has become a symbol of terror and mystery. The abominable snowman. This is the claw that reaches out to kill. And this is the footprint in the snow, so astounding that scientific laboratories throughout the world are rocked by its startling impact.
This is a mold taken from the footprint found outside the cabin door. By measuring the width, the length, and the depth of the print, their composite picture described the species as being 9 feet tall and weighing around 1,800 pounds.
What did Tanaka say?
Well, he was convinced in his mind that the hair follicle was closer to that of man than to that of any other animal known to exist.
Now you can follow the relentless pursuit of the half-human monster whose earth-rocking fury broke the torturing bonds of his civilized tormentors. Half-human, he learned the terrifying power of fire over the natives who worshipped him. Half-human, he set off an avalanche of destruction against the invaders of his mountain kingdom. He still felt the surging need for human love.
King Kong versus Godzilla. Nothing you've ever seen can equal the thrills of this extraordinary motion picture. Nothing you've ever felt can equal its awesome fury as the mightiest monsters of the ages clash in the battle of the century. It sears the emotions with shock and terror. It staggers the imagination. All new in color. King Kong versus Godzilla.
Live from the Land of Light in Nebula M78, home of the mighty Ultra Heroes, it's Monster Kid Radio's Beta Capsule Review. Japanese folklore meets the future in the 41st episode of Ultra 7, Challenge from Underwater. A group of people who call themselves the Kappa Club go camping in the countryside in hopes of catching a glimpse of the elusive Kappa, a mischievous legendary creature said to dwell in rivers and lakes. While speculating about the true nature of the cryptid, they meet a local man who claimed to have a real Kappa encounter, and while investigating the sighting, they're surprised by 2 figures emerging from the lake. However, it's Dan and Furuhashi in scuba gear, conducting a search of their own in response to UFO reports. Soon the Ultra Guard has set up camp near the lake, and when Dan senses the presence of an intruder, he chases a diminutive, fast-moving humanoid through the woods. Meanwhile, the Kappa Club continues their own search, but when one of their party is brutally murdered, the Ultra Guard redoubles their efforts to get to the bottom of things, something Dan accomplishes all too well. He becomes trapped beneath the lake's surface by the Kappa, who reveal themselves to be far more than a fairy tale. Challenge from Underwater is an admirable standalone episode that is especially appropriate for spooky season viewing. That's because the first dozen minutes take place in the dark forest, concentrating on the Kappa Club's cryptozoological pursuits. In fact, a full 8 minutes pass before a familiar Ultra Guard face appears, and by then, an atmosphere of mystery has been well established. From that point forward, it becomes a more conventional Ultra 7 story, which is no complaint. We get a bombing run, a kaiju fight, and another creative use of the eye slugger. But it's the tie-in to Kappa folklore that gives this episode its resonance, drawing on old yokai tales to tell a story of modern people engaging with the unexplained as an amateur pastime. For Monster Kid Radio's Beta Capsule Review, this is Mark Matzke reporting.
Monster Marathon, now all in one gigantic show. 3 of the newest and most exciting monster hits, starring Earth champion and protector Godzilla. First, thrill the Godzilla on Monster Island with more monsters than have ever appeared on the screen at one time. Then it's the action-packed Godzilla versus the Cosmic Monster. And finally, the classic Godzilla versus Megalon. All 3 in one colossal show. Rated G.
The Smog Monster, spewing its poisonous venom over the earth. Only one force dared stand up to its overpowering evil. Godzilla. See Godzilla versus the Smog Monster. 2 monsters battling for the domination of the earth. Godzilla versus the Smog Monster. An American International Pictures release in color, rated G. Godzilla versus the Smog Monster. The battle for life on Earth.
I am Dracula, and I bid you welcome to the podcast devoted to the classic, and sometimes not so classic, genre cinema of yesteryear. And I offer you this warning. Sometimes Derek and his guests get excited, and they may spoil a movie or two. You know how excited monster kids can get sometimes. If Monster Kid Radio spoils a movie for you, do not come whining to me. I cannot stand whines.
All right, listeners, we are into week 2 of Kaijuly, a month of kaiju conversation here on Monster Kid Radio, or Kaiju Kid Radio. We actually probably ought to start calling it for the rest of the month, because I'm just getting to my kaiju stuff, man. I've got my kaiju mojo going. I'm loving my kaiju material. Last week, we talked about a movie with Robert Kelly from Record All Monsters. This week, though, is something I've been wanting to do for a very, very long time. I think it's been over a year since I first proposed this, or it's been proposed to me. I kind of forget who brought it up to begin with. Talking about Ultraman Kaiju, and I can't do it by myself. We're going to kind of have a roundtable talk about our top 3 favorite kaiju from the Ultraman franchise. And, you know, I can't talk about Ultraman if I don't have the man behind the Ultraman segment, the Beta Capsule review that's done every week here on Monster Kid Radio, knocking it out of the Ultra Park every week. It's Mark Matzke. How you doing, man?
I'm doing great. Glad to be on with you. And this is, you're right, a topic that has been floating around for a while. And I'm excited about talking Ultra Kaiju tonight.
Oh, it's going to be awesome. Now, we're not alone. We've got a third. We got somebody else here on the call as well. Somebody who's been part of Monster Kid Radio for a while. It's been a little while since he's been on, but as far as I'm concerned, he is as much a Monster Kid irregular as Mark or anybody else who's been on the show. He is an author. He's written books about kaiju. He's written books about monos. He's Anthony Wendel. How you doing, man?
I fell down an editing hole, but was saved by the Science Special Search Party, and now I'm back.
Fantastic. Oh, man, we're going to get into some ultra fun today. I'm stoked. I haven't talked about Ultraman very much on the show. Talked about Shin Ultraman when Beth and I went to go see it, but that's about it, because I've been letting Mark do most of the heavy lifting here. I get to play in Sandbox now. I get to talk about Ultraman, and I'm just so excited to get into it.
Where should we begin? I mean, there's so many things we could talk about in terms of just the phenomenon that is Ultraman.
We should talk a little bit about that. Actually, Mark and I were talking before I hit record. What do we want to talk about? I think before we dive into, you know, our favorite kaiju what is Ultraman? For people who are just now joining us or don't know, Ultraman is just this incredible franchise that's been going off and on for 60 years now? 50 years? 40 years? I don't know. I can't keep track.
First one was in 1966.
All right. So what is that? That's a while. Math is hard.
They're approaching the 60th anniversary.
Okay. All right. Now, I'll talk about my exposure to Ultraman, but starting with Mark, how did you first discover Ultraman?
I discovered Ultraman as a kid on public TV, just on over the airwaves. It was part of an afternoon package. I remember being in kindergarten and first grade and tuning into that same channel in Detroit, Michigan would play all manner of monster movies and Godzilla. They'd have Godzilla little marathons, and part of their afternoon programming was just an Ultraman episode. And I didn't even really know exactly what it was at first. I was at that age where you see something on TV and it's awesome, but you're not exactly sure where it is, where it's coming from, what exactly it is. And it took me a while moving away from the Detroit area to get even back in touch with Ultraman. But that was my exposure to it at first. And then as I got back into kaiju fandom, Godzilla fandom as an adult, what I quickly realized and became fascinated with was the production story behind Ultraman and the offshoot of Eiji Tsuburaya, who had his one foot in Toho and the other foot in his own Tsuburaya Productions, that created this incredible franchise that has lasted for so long.
And Anthony, what about you, man?
Ultraman eluded me all my childhood. I mean, I remember seeing commercials for it. I remember playing the Super NES game, but unfortunately, it took me a while to finally discover it. It was actually something I found in my adulthood and just told myself, this is one of the pinnacles of kaiju. You have to go straight into it and explore it. And I started with the original Ultraman, and frankly, it wasn't my Ultraman. I really want to point this out, that when it comes to a franchise, any type of franchise, sometimes going chronological and experiencing it in order is not always the best thing to do. You need to find your series, the series that keeps you going as you trudge through every different incarnation that the franchise takes over the years. And though I didn't see, after watching the first Ultraman, I knew enough stuff, and I was like, I appreciate it. It wasn't until I came across Ultraman Mebius, the 40th anniversary series, that I realized this is my Ultraman. This will help me to expand and watch as much of the show as humanly possible.
Okay. My story when it comes to kaiju and tokusatsu cinema and television, I've talked about over the years here on the show that I didn't really consider Godzilla as something that was quote unquote for me until much later in life, until after actually I started Monster Kid Radio. I didn't really develop a taste for it. And when I saw King Kong versus Godzilla at the Hollywood Theater, hosted by Kyle Yount from the late lamented Kaiju cast, and that opened my eyes to this whole different world of cinema that I dove deep into. And somewhere along the way, that led to a door labeled Ultraman that I kind of peeked in and then had no idea what I was in for. I had no idea there was so much. And while I have gone back and watched a lot of the stuff chronologically, I did kind of do what you are talking about, Anthony, when it comes to finding your Ultraman. I love the original Ultraman. I love Ultra Q a lot, but that's kind of sort of not what we're talking about here. Ultraman 80 became my gateway into all things Ultraman. Ultraman 80 is my Ultraman, and I love Ultraman 80 so much. Now, I've gone back and watched other stuff too, but that was my entry point into the Ultra franchise, and I'm just fascinated by the fact that it is such a long-lived and deep franchise. There's so much out there. I don't know if it's true because I've never been there, but I've always been told that there's actually more Ultraman stuff to do in Japan than there is for Godzilla stuff, which blows my mind because I figured Godzilla, King of the Monsters, and it's a big guy. But no, I've been told, and I just blows my mind that there's so much Ultraman material and things to do in that part of the world. It's just such a big franchise that we just get a taste of over here.
Yeah.
So, Mark, which Ultraman would you say is your Ultraman?
Well, I think the original is sort of that for me because it was the first one that I saw, and then going back and watching it, I do genuinely enjoy it. But I think as far as modern series go, I'm a huge fan of Ultraman Max because it incorporates many of the original actors in that cast as well. And I really, I'm a huge fan of Ultraman Tiga as well. I watched that a lot with my son when he was at precisely the right age for it. And I guess I would have to say Ultraman Max, I think it's the sweet spot for me. But I also really enjoyed 2020's Ultraman Z that was coming out every week on YouTube. One of the first times they did that, and now it's kind of become a standard in the modern era. So like what Derek was saying is absolutely right. We get a little taste of it, but I think more and more there's a realization that there is a Western appetite for these shows, and Tsuburaya is kind of paying attention to that. It's kind of rewarding now that they are trying to make connections with our culture too. And there is an annual Ultraman festival that's held there every year. It's like a Disneyland of Ultraman, and kids and families go like year after year after year. And it's a bucket list thing for me, absolutely, to go. It's usually in August, from what I understand.
This year it'll be July 22nd to August 28th.
Okay, nice.
Well, any listeners, if you happen to be out there, give me a call. Let me know how it is, or maybe pick me up a souvenir. I'll pay for shipping. I got to get out there someday. You know, I want to see the sights. I want to go visit Japan and travel the world with my wife anyway. But man, just to get out to Japan, the home of all these incredible kaiju things that I love and tokusatsu productions that I love, would be amazing. And you mentioned that they are trying to make sure that this material is available to us over here in the West. They've got a YouTube channel, and my understanding is that the episodes get posted on their YouTube channel pretty quickly after they're broadcast in Japan. Is that right?
It's insane. I mean, they have been so receptive to the American audience in terms of usually the more recent shows being aired, they get like the first two get about 2 weeks you get 2 weeks to catch them, and then they'll be rotated out. But they're still coming out like the day after they air in Japan. As a matter of fact, this in the month of July, we'll have the newest Ultraman Blazar, coming. And not only will it be coming a day after it's airing in Japan, it will also be airing on their YouTube channel with an English dub as one of the options.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I have
the accommodation. I don't know what is.
Yeah, they do make it available with the closed captioning button on YouTube, so you can watch it with the subtitles if you want. And they're usually pretty good, but yeah, to have it dubbed for those who prefer it that way. And this is the Ultraman official YouTube channel. This is all legit, all above board. They're putting it out there for us. I'll make sure there's a link in the show notes as well. If people are interested in checking it out and subscribing and just going through their backlog of stuff. Because they're not just putting the new stuff out. The stuff that came out years ago, they're putting stuff up too. And that's just really cool. Plus, Mill Creek Entertainment is doing a big thing with Ultraman. They're still putting out some of the older stuff. That's what all my Ultraman on disc is from, is the Mill Creek Entertainment releases from the past several years.
You and me both, man. I stocked up like crazy. Comes from all those years that Godzilla fans were searching bargain bins and stuff because we couldn't find physical media. You know, we didn't have a Criterion collection of all the show Godzilla movies.
And I would be lying if I didn't admit to having done this. And it's been a while since I've done it. But when I had a little bit more disposable income, I did use Google Translate to help me navigate Amazon Japan's website.
Yeah.
And I have picked up some Blu-rays and specifically soundtrack albums. Because at the time, it was costing me just a little over like $12 American to buy a soundtrack album from an Ultraman series and have it shipped here. I don't know what it is now, but I've got a a good stack of music.
Yeah.
Of course, Ultraman 80s, soundtrack album and a bunch of their other stuff too. So it's easier now to get your hands on, which is great.
Good stuff.
So, as far as what I wanted to talk about today with like our top 3, obviously it's going to be hard because, and this is something I was explaining to my wife, there are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of kaiju associated with Ultraman. And that's one of the things that blows my mind about this franchise is that, especially at the beginning when they weren't reusing or reintroducing kaiju from older series, every week was a new monster. Sure, maybe they took a shortcut and borrowed the Godzilla suit and put a frill around its neck, but every week was a new monster. And that's just mind-blowing to me. I don't know how they did. Super Raya was a madman and a genius.
Mm-hmm. And some of these kaiju themselves, despite destroying cities in previous incarnations, have had their own fan followings.
Yeah.
They had a series called Ultra Mega Monster Battle, in which they actually had the Super Raya monsters being used, the Ultraman monsters throughout the years, being used essentially like Pokemon to fight other Ultraman monsters. The main character of the series using
it's Gomora.
Gomora as his main monster that he would summon out.
That's cool. I'm a little surprised. You talk about using kaiju like in like a Pokemon kind of battling situation. I'm a little surprised, and maybe it's just because I don't play a lot of video games or whatever. I feel like the Ultraman franchise, are there a lot of video games out there that I'm just not aware of? It feels like something that would lend itself to computer or handheld gameplay.
Yes and no. There was a lot back in the day when characters were just, hey, let's just make a Street Fighter clone and just have your cast kick each other. That was more common. Now with all the graphics and stuff, there was a game, I forget the title of it, a little while ago there. You are actually playing somebody who's like surviving a kaiju attack. In one of the stages, you have Ultraman fighting the kaiju, but you're playing the human who's trying to survive the night. I actually think it's called Survive the Night.
I mentioned this on the show too. I play a game called Godzilla Battle Line on my iPad, which is from Toho, and it's licensed, it's legit. But they have reached out and they've licensed using Ultraman and like Legendary's King Kong and a few other characters. So I do get to play a little bit with Ultraman in this battle game and set him up to go fight Godzilla or any of the others. Ultraman versus Jet Jaguar is always fun to watch.
You and me, Bab, I love that game.
Yeah, I haven't played it in a while because I've been so busy. But yeah, I do enjoy that and enjoy pulling out some of the non-Toho kaiju to play. But I would love, actually, I take it back. I would hate if there was an easily accessible Ultraman game because I'd get nothing else done.
Yeah, for sure. We played a lot of Godzilla Unleashed back in the Wii days.
There you go.
We were on that game a lot.
Yeah.
It's actually called City Shrouded in Darkness. Play as two citizens trying to survive kaiju battle as they erupt in the city. Ultraman was one of the characters fighting a fake Ultraman, and you had to survive as a human as this carnage is breaking out around you.
That's awesome. So yeah, hundreds. I didn't do a count. I couldn't find a website to give me an exact number. But I'd say there's easily 400, 500, 600 different kaiju that have surfaced over the years.
Yeah.
And sometimes they get revamped a little bit. Like my number 1 in my top 3 has appeared in multiple series over the years, and they keep kind of updating him and tweaking the costume here and there and that sort of thing. But do either of you have any idea? Is there an official count?
Yeah, I've talked to people about that, and no one seems to know the exact number. I don't even know if Super Raya knows all the permutations, right? But it's certainly it's in the hundreds for sure.
Has to be at least.
Yeah.
Least. Now in the very
beginning, just the show era. I mean,
mm-hmm.
Well, in the beginning, they were recycling or borrowing costumes from the Toho productions, but eventually, and pretty quickly, they started developing their own style of doing things. I suppose because it's impressive they would do like 20 to 30 new monsters a season. But they only had to be on screen for about 5, 6, 7 minutes.
Yeah.
as opposed to a feature film needing to be set ready 3 or 4 months in a row, you know?
Yeah.
We haven't done a top 3 episode on the show in a while. I don't think we have anyway. I don't remember. It's over 600 episodes. I'm allowed to forget. But what we're going to do is I'm going to kick it off because I want our guests to kind of have the final spot. I'll do my number 3, and then I'll hand it off to the guests, and then we'll just kind of go round robin here. If we have some overlap, fine. No big deal. No, nobody's keeping score. And I've been struggling. I've got a list. I've got a notebook. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I got 7 different monsters on here. So I'm only going to pick 3. I know which one's my number 1. I think for my number 3, you know what? I'm just going to go with it. And I mentioned Ultraman 80 at the top of all of this. So, of course, one of my guys comes from Ultraman 80. I really like the look and the vibe and the sword and the cape that's more wholesome cape of King Gultan or Gultan from Ultraman 80. He just looks cool. He's got a cool vibe. The fight scene that he has with Ultraman in the episode he's in just is really neat. There's some cool camera work going on too. But I really like this dude. I'll make sure there's links to all of the kaiju that we're talking about in the show notes because it's kind of hard to talk about how cool something looks in an audio format. So I'll make sure there's a link or a presentation or something somebody can check out. Hey everybody, Derek from the editing side of things here. I decided not to include a link in the show notes to the different kaiju that we're talking about because I don't want to spoil the surprise for anybody who might be looking at the website first. I want you to listen to the conversation. In the next couple of days, I'll post links in the show notes or on the website somewhere where you can go in and click and see all the different kaiju that we're talking about. All right, back to the conversation. But I'm a big fan of King Gultan here. I think he just looks neat. And he's got a sword. I like swords.
Yeah.
So that would be my number 3. And you know what? I'm pulling up my Skype here, and the name next to me is Anthony. So I'm going to throw it over to Anthony for his number 3.
My number 3 is sometimes known as the Galactic Dinosaur, a.k.a. also known as Zeton.
Ah, yes.
Now, with Zeton, all 3 of my well, at least the first 3 and 2 both set precedents. With 3, with Zeton was Ultraman's final opponent, and he didn't actually make it out alive. He actually had to have backup. He had to be saved by his superior, Ultraman Zoffi, and it was actually the SSSP was able to defeat the monster by coming together. Because of this precedent of actually killing the original character of Ultraman, whenever a Zeton comes on the screen, every Ultraman fan, their stomachs tighten at the idea of, oh no, this is bad. It's an immediate feeling of, this is an opponent that's going to give whatever incarnation of Ultraman a run for their money. Mm-hmm. And he has returned multiple times in multiple series and even in movies as a final boss, and he lives up to its name. It is a force to be reckoned with, especially as it calls out its name in a menacing tone that sounds like it's powering up its next attack. Zeton.
I love his appearance, and I will put a spoiler warning at the beginning of this, so I don't mind spoiling it. I love Zeton's appearance in Shin Ultraman. It's a very beefed up version of Zeton, and it's impressive.
The Zeton of Shin Ultraman is actually the code name for their planet-destroying weapon. That right there just shows you if a Zeton is in the mix, yikes.
Yeah. Good call.
Yeah, and what he brings up there, I think, is so important, which is the sound design on these characters. Mm-hmm. And the fact that in, Shin Ultraman, they use the exact same sound cues as in the original series. So there is that resonance across the years, and it's like goosebump inducing when you hear that, and your stomach tightens. It's quite true. And these monsters have some distinct sounds that's just as much a part of their character as how they look.
Yeah, and as a sound guy, I totally react to that. I love, not only did they have to come up with new suits for every monster, but they had to come up with new ways to make him sound scary. Yeah, sometimes they would recycle, roars and slow him down or play him backwards or whatever. But that's hard work, man. That's not just building something out of rubber. That's a lot more, and that's impressive to me. Well, what's your number 3, Mark?
Well, my number 3 is Gomez, and Gomez made his first appearance in Ultra Q episode 1. In fact, it's the first monster that you ever see on a Tsuburaya Ultra show. And it is, quite obviously a repurposed Godzilla suit. It's not even a Jiris level where you put a frill on it for a while. It's just basically a 60s Godzilla suit with a little extra hair on like whiskers and a little extra horn on top of his head, and that's about it. But it's just so iconic, and for me, it's a bridge between Toho and Tsuburaya that only, Eiji Tsuburaya would be able to pull off. Because it's really phenomenal to think about that he was able to acquire the suit and use it for his television show. And he made that happen. And even though it's not an Ultraman opponent in Ultra Q, it's part of an Ultra Q sort of Twilight Zone-y type story. Gomez does show up in Ultraman Z's first episode from the 2020 series I was talking about. And, he's kind of a diminutive kaiju. He's not gigantically huge. He's big enough to destroy buildings, but he's not towering over the buildings. And I really like the care that they took in sort of establishing that's the first kaiju in Ultraman Z. And they're going to get much bigger. And in fact, he does reappear later in the series. But it's just a cool tip of the cap, I think, to the history of the franchise. Makes for a really cool collectible character as well.
Now, I mentioned Ultra Q earlier, and you just brought up Ultra Q. Briefly, for people who don't know, Ultra Q was the series that predates Ultraman. They both have Ultra in the title, but they didn't really connect story-wise. I mean, even some of Ultra Q doesn't connect to itself, and some of the episodes are anthology-style episodes. But it is a very Twilight Zone-y, X-Files-like show with kaiju, sometimes big kaiju. And I love it. I'm a big fan of Ultra Q as well. And maybe in the future we can do a big Ultra Q deep dive or whatever. I know Mark did cover Ultra Q during Beta Capsule reviews early days here on the show. If you haven't seen Ultra Q, I highly recommend it. It's some really good stuff.
I got to say, as Mark mentions the reuse of the Godzilla suit with Gomez, I personally think they did better with Gomez than they did with Jiris. Jiris is just got thin and slap some paint on it. I mean, it's been very hard to make him evolve as a monster and become up again. Meanwhile, with Gomez, because they threw a lot of stuff on him, and you can tell it's a Godzilla suit, but adding claws, some stuff to his chest, look like he's got different type of scales, the hair on the face, horns. He evolved much better in the Ultraman mythos and has been able to come back again and again. Thinking actually about Ultraman Z, where Jiris was returned as one of the metals that they used to for power, but he wasn't actually summoned, was he?
I don't recall.
I just think that they brought back Gomez more times than they brought reincarnations of Jiris back.
Yes. Yeah, for sure.
I like Gomez quite a bit too, and actually he's one of the names on my paper here.
All right.
But I ultimately decided, since he started in Ultra Q, we'll give him a shout out. I was going to bring him up in an honorable mention. I'm glad you brought him up though, because he's really cool. All right, for my number 2, I'm going to go with, and I apologize if I don't get the right syllables emphasized the right way with some of these monster titles. I've seen so many of them over the years. Sadola? Sadola? Sadola?
Yeah.
Sadola. Okay, I like him a lot. I like him a lot, and I like him especially in Ultraman Mebius, which, you brought up, Anthony, as being one of your entry points. I like the look of him, but I like the way he fights. I like the arms that kind of extend out, and especially in the Ultraman Mebius series, there's one fight scene with a lot of fog and smoke, and the claws are just shooting out from who knows where, and it's just super cool. I really like the look of him as well. I love the pincer hands.
Yeah.
Just really cool looking. But I like him, and especially in Ultraman Mebius when there's more than one. Which I always love seeing multiple kaiju going up against our Ultraman hero. Just makes Ultraman even more impressive when he can take out more than one. Now in Mebius he does, well, go watch it. Go watch Ultraman Mebius. It's good. Seriously, it's a good show. It's one of my favorites as well. But yeah, that's my number 3 is that guy there. Anthony, what about you?
Coming in at number 2 for me is a character with the subtitle of The Friendly Monster. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give it up for the Pigmon.
Oh, yeah.
The friendly monster that's got a face like a pit bull. It's so ugly looking, you just love it. He's just a giant ball of cuteness because of how friendly and weird looking he is.
He's great. Pigmon's awesome. He's in my honorable mentions. So.
Now, unfortunately, just like with Zeton, his first time in the series set a precedent. In the original Ultraman, he returned from his first appearance and actually helped the Science Patrol, but it cost him his life.
Yeah.
So just as the fans' stomach tighten at the idea of Zeton appearing because of how powerful they are, we all can't help but have our stomachs tighten every time a Pigmon is on because we find ourselves worrying, oh no, is the little guy going to make it? Is he going to make it? Is he going to make it? Mm-hmm. And there's actually a Ultraman episode, I think it's the X episode, Ultraman X episode, where a little girl befriends a Pigmon, and then the villagers say, oh no, you can't trust him, he's going to be bad. And then he ends up saving a villager from an attack. And until like the very last shot, you think, oh no, the Pigman bought it. But it turned out he was actually fine, and he could return to playing with the little girl.
Yeah.
But that's the kind of thing that we will worry about every time a Pigman is on, because little guys are essentially just the friendliest monster of all Ultraman, and they're just here. They're in a universe where there's a lot of bigger things that will crush them underneath their feet. And as a matter of fact, another Pigmon appearance comes to mind, wherein the introduction of Ultraman Zero in the movie where he's introduced, as he's training, it's by saving a Pigmon from getting hurt that his master Ultraman Leo realizes, your heart's in the right place, kid. You're ready to become a full-fledged Ultra.
He is adorable. No, he's not pretty to look at. And some incarnations of him in various series have gotten even more ugly as we go. But he's just adorable, man. He's awesome, man. He's a hero. He sacrifices himself. Yeah, it's so good. Oh, what's your number 2, Mark?
Number 2 for me is going to be the aforementioned Gomora.
Oh, okay.
Really great style, I think, to the costume. You know, he's a sort of Godzilla type body shape, but his head is kind of juts out on either side with a large sort of horn rim and more of a kind of almost a beak-like mouth. And just his eyes are really mean in the same way that like the 67 Godzilla costume had those mean eyes that just, it shows you when he shows up, he's gonna rip everything to shreds, which he does in the original 2-part Ultraman series, and he goes after Osaka Castle. But there's crazy things that happen with Gomora that I love. Like, his tail gets cut off and the tail flops around and kind of has a life of its own for a while. I mean, it's just that type of unpredictable quality to those Ultraman stories that is one of the reasons I love it so much, is that you just never know. I mean, you'd think you'd get his tail cut off and that would be it, but Gomora just burrows into the ground and his tail flops around, continuing to cause damage. And he's been one of those characters that's also, survived across the franchise. As Anthony said, the Ultra Galaxy series had him as the character that was summoned to battle other kaiju and would take on like this glowing orange form and was virtually unstoppable, when he would do that, and became a real fan favorite, I think, based on that, in part on that episode. And even there is like a Mecha Gomora form in one of the series that, anytime you go Mecha on one of these kaiju, you've made it when there's a Mecha version of you, and that happened to Gomora as well.
I was going to bring that up. We haven't played the Classic 5 on the show in a while, and partly because I'm waiting until I get my new cards done up and all that. But one of the questions in that Classic 5 game is, what kaiju would you want to see a Mecha version of? And you don't have to say Gomora because there already is one. Cyber Gomora from Ultraman X, which I really liked Ultraman X.
Yeah.
So we got him in there, and he just looks awesome. I think he turns up on Ultraman Geet as well, but I haven't watched that one in a while.
I think so. I mean, he's just so popular and continues to appear across series. I wouldn't be surprised if we get a Gomora in Blazar. I think it's got that sort of retro feel to it already, and just the little bits that they've shown.
I'm so looking forward to it. Forward. Well, before I get into my number one, I have a couple that I chose not to go with. I'm going to call them my honorable mention, or some of the goofier ones that I like, because sometimes I like my stuff a little goofy and silly. And some of the kaiju, after a while, you might draw the silly card, and some of the kaiju look a little goofy. And there's one in Ultraman Towards the Future, which is the show they did down in Australia, who looks like a weird elephant-looking kind of thing. Gazebo. I just love the look of him. He's not, I don't know, he's nothing special. I just love that he's this goofy looking elephant thing that has to fight an Ultraman. But I only threw him on there because of how he looks. I also threw Piccolo on here because of how he looks.
Mm-hmm.
He looks like a giant puppet come to life.
Yeah.
It's like a combination of like a weird Pinocchio thing with maybe a sombrero hat. I don't know what it's supposed to be, but it looks ridiculous. But I love seeing him seriously trying to fight Ultraman, and it makes me smile every time. And the only other one that I want to mention here as an honorable mention would be Dracula's, because it's Dracula from Planet Carmilla. Come on, man. You mix some vampire stuff, kind of, sort of, in with my Ultraman. I'm all in.
Yeah.
All in. Any of you have any honorable mentions or ones that didn't quite make the cut?
I've got two I'd like to bring up. The first is King.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
First appearing in Ultra 7, he is unique in that, sometimes they incorporate different things over time in terms of, this character always had fire powers, and or some characters, like the bird ones always were able to flap their wings and there's a tornado. But, King has, and thanks to its name, it always has been electric based. And it's always interesting when they come into the fight. My second honorable mention goes to another adorable monster but has a heart of gold to step into the ring. It's the Capsule monster Miklas.
Yeah.
Probably because he's the Capsule monster who gets the most attention in the Ultraman Mebius series. And his bonding with Konomi of Team Guys in Ultraman Mebius helped to solidify that Konomi's ability, or what she brought to the team, was that she knew a lot about the monsters, and she knew the more behavioral aspects of monsters. So on top of, helping the team in battle, it helped a team member actually to find out what their specialty was in the team.
And Weakless is pretty cool. King, I'm totally down for. I don't know why I skipped King in my thought process, but I love King as well. What about you, Mark? You didn't quite
honorable mention. Yeah, I would say, like, dovetailing off of what you're saying, on sort of like the wacky design front. The most amazing suit to me is Pestar, the oil monster, which, when you're younger, you just sort of accept these as monsters, right? But when you're older, you start looking at the suits and saying, how did they do that? And in this case, I think it's two guys side by side, and the way just they're trying to shuffle and move together. I mean, it's probably a major reason why a lot of the time in that particular original series episode, he's in the water, is so you don't really catch on at first that it's two guys standing together with a bat head sort of down, centrally located. It looks like a giant oil drinking bat, but it's just a fantastic imaginative stroke, I think, to let's put two guys in the suit and see, it's just amazing. It's an amazing feat. And I think they pulled it off. With anytime you have an oil refinery in an episode, it's going to be, explosions galore. So that's a great one. Oil SOS. Another honorable mention connected to to Pigmon is Red King. Red King is he's mean usually. He's so mean. And his agency comes about as the fact that he's the monster that killed Pigmon on the island in that first episode, and just always seems in a bad mood. Red King is also matched with other monsters, usually like in Monster Island situations, and he just rips the other monsters to shreds. So, he's a strong, mean kaiju for the most part. There's a sort of softening of the character in Ultraman Z, which was interesting, I thought, and pretty interestingly done. Well done there. But he also, in other series like Ultraman Max, he picks up the ability to actually spit boulders instead of like a beam or fire or lasers. He evidently eats rocks and can spit them out in a stream, which, I don't know, those are all kind of distinctive qualities.
I can agree that he can be put on honorable mention in my list, too. Once the Red King comes into play, it's not as nearly as serious as a Zeton, but you better be bringing your A game nonetheless.
Mm-hmm.
So despite the fact, as we discussed earlier, that there are literally hundreds of kaiju from the Ultraman franchise, so many different monsters that we could pick from, how can three guys who are just talking about their top three and maybe a couple of honorable mentions, how can these guys double up? But they did, because my number one is Red King.
Oh, wow.
I love Red King so much. I don't have a lot of them, but I've got a handful of the vinyl Ultraman figures, a little like, 3.5 inch tall vinyl figures from Bandai. Super cheap, whatever. And the one that has been unpacked since I moved into this house and is sitting on my desk right now is a Red King. It's my guy. He is my favorite Ultra Kaiju villain. He's got a swagger. He's got a strength. He's got an attitude. I love him so much. I love to see him go toe-to-toe with Ultraman, whichever series he happens to turn up in. Yes, he is responsible for Pigmon's death, so there is that too, which kind of gives him a little bit more of a villainous edge. I've always liked the bad guys when it comes to my fiction and stories, typically. And just Red King is just he's awesome. He's my number one. So I'm sitting here biting my tongue. You guys are talking about him being on your honorable mention. It's like,
well, at the same time, since he is your number one, I think we need to bring this up. Have you seen Ultraman Z?
Yes, I have.
Well, I think we really need to talk about that episode with the Red King, because that shows the exact opposite, or just like the reversal of what can happen with these characters. Yeah. Because instead of being a destroyer of the day and ripping people and an absolute savage, as Mark said, the Red King of Ultraman Z is actually revealed at the end of the episode to have been a father protecting his mate who was holding their egg. It actually results in the death of this Red King protecting its mate, results in the human main character who houses Ultraman Z having a major existential crisis for a couple episodes because he questions if he is making the right choices in battle. I mean, that right there goes to just the power that these characters, these kaiju have had through the way they've been able to be recast and reused in such dynamic ways over the years.
I agree. Well, what about you? What's your number one, Anthony?
Coming in at number one for me is the Space Ninja Alien Bolton.
Oh, nice.
Through its ability to its space ninjutsu maneuvers, the Boltons have been able to make duplicates of themselves every time they fight an Ultraman, which results in some very impressive fight scenes as the Ultraman works to try to be able to find the right duplicate and actually win the day.
That's super iconic. I mean, like a handful of these kaiju that really are synonymous with the entire franchise. Baltan is right there, like right at the top.
What's on the top for you, Mark?
Well, it's kind of an oddball choice, but I think you'll understand why I chose him. It is the snow monster Wu from the episode The Phantom of Snow Mountain. And Wu is basically a gigantic, abominable snowman or yeti.
That is so cool.
Yeah, and he's the guardian of this orphaned girl and watches over her and makes sure that nothing happens because the townspeople, are kind of out to get her, and he ensures that it doesn't happen. And I just love his design, how he appears in the snow. You don't get glimpses of him until a little bit later in the episode. But one of the things that I also enjoy about Wu, just as a character, is that although he fights Ultraman, he's not killed by Ultraman. Wu just sort of fades into the snow because his task is seen as complete. And that's one of those things about the Ultraman stories throughout the series, is that while some people might think, well, it's always just a battle and Ultraman kills the kaiju at the end and it's the same story every time, that's just not the case. I mean, there's many instances where Ultraman doesn't kill a kaiju if he doesn't have to, and will sometimes take them away to, say, the monster graveyard, or just find another solution to the problem besides killing the monster. And in the case of Wu just fades away into the snow, which I think is a perfect dovetail with like all of the Yeti and Sasquatch legends throughout the world, that, you see one and can even interact with one perhaps, but it's out of your reach always. So I just love that particular episode. I think visually it's really, really distinguished in the way that it's set in a snowy environment and so forth. And I have some Wu figures that I'm very happy with. There's one in particular is a M1 or Marasan figure that glows in the dark. That's one of my favorite collectibles, is my Wu figure that I've got.
That is so cool. For listeners who don't know, Mark is involved with Small Town Monsters, which is a production company that does documentaries about cryptids, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Mothman, and all the others out there. So, yeah, you said Wu, and it's like, of course, yeah. Figuring out my face. It's like, yeah, that makes sense. That tracks.
Yeah.
I do like Wu, too. I like the look of him. And what you just said and what Anthony was saying earlier, too, regarding Red King's appearance and Ultraman Z and all that, it's not just, I mean, yes, a lot of it is Ultraman beating up monsters, and a bunch of awesome models get destroyed along the way, and that's super cool, and that's super fun. But in the short period of time that they have to do a show, 24 minutes, 25 minutes, however long they take, they can pack some pretty cool story stuff in there that's not just beat up monster, recycle, repeat. You can do some neat things. And that's one thing that I think Ultraman has done really well over the years, is they change it up. They don't just get stale doing the same thing over and over and over again. That makes me happy.
Yeah. No, I agree completely. I mean, that's sort of variations on a theme is kind of the phrase that always pops into my mind with Ultraman, is that clearly, I mean, the idea, the concept has legs because it's still going and is as popular as it's ever been, in some ways more popular than ever. And in doing so, I mean, you have to diversify a little bit. And some of the series, really get into the backstories of the main characters on the team. And like Mebius is a prime example of that, where you really get to know these characters and you kind of care about what happens to them. You don't want anything bad to befall them. And that's just good storytelling.
Absolutely.
I could dovetail this or spin this off into a much, much longer conversation about Ultraman, and maybe I will down the line. But as we kind of wrap up, just any kind of final thoughts regarding your love of Ultraman, anything Ultraman related you wanted to bring up before we bring this to a close?
Frankly, I kick myself After everything I've experienced with Ultraman, I kick myself for taking so long to experience a series that has now given me so much joy and entertainment and has become a part of my life in this last decade. And now with all that Mill Creek Entertainment has done to be able to make these series available, with all the original company has done with their YouTube channel to give people the opportunity to experience this series, nothing is stopping the band except for their own dedication. And frankly, I cannot plead it enough with other Monster kids out there. You need some Ultraman in your life.
Speaking the gospel of Ultraman.
Can I get my man?
Let me get us a watch. Okay, anyway. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I second all that. And I guess what I will add is that something very personal, I suppose. I don't think it's overstating it to say that Ultraman Z is one of the things that got me through the pandemic year of 2020, because it was telling such a good story. It was paying homage to the series of the past in such a intentional way. I just loved that. And it was something to look forward to. You knew that Saturday morning was going to be Ultraman Z time. And that took me back to my childhood in some kind of profound ways, I guess. And just knowing that, hey, we've made it through another week and we've got this thing to look forward to that is so exciting and just transports you away from how crazy the world has become. It made me love Ultraman even more, which I didn't know was possible, but it really did. And I will carry that with me for a long time.
I'm not going to try to add anything on top of that, because that's just a great way to kind of close this out. 30 minutes of joy a week, courtesy of their YouTube channel. I can't wait for the new series. Mark is keeping the Ultraman flame going on Monster Kid Radio with the Beta Capsule review, which I hope he never, ever stops. Unless you need to stop, then, whatever. But yeah, I know listeners are digging it. So
Good. Yeah, it's a blast. And I love being in Ultraman, a Return of Ultraman right now, because that's a series that I just am more and more fond of all the time.
Well, Anthony, what's going on with you? Where can people find you online? You got a book project in the works you want to talk about? What's going on, man?
I'm still working on some things. I got nothing to announce right now, but you can check out my Twitter at Anthony Wendel for right now. I might be thinking about a new way of doing things. And also, once in a while, if something piques my interest, I usually pop over and write a review for a comic book over at Monster Kid Radio. I actually did a lot of the issues of the last Ultraman comic from Marvel Comics, Ultraman, The Mystery of Ultra 7, and I cannot state enough how entertaining series was, where it really spells out how the Space Garrison is a mixture of the Green Lantern Corps and the Star Trek Federation.
Okay. And Mark, we've got a big section in the show notes every week of what you're up to, where people can find you, but what's coming up for you? Anything you want to talk about?
Oh, sure. Smalltownmonsters.com is kind of the clearinghouse for all the stuff that I'm involved with STM. We have, and I really appreciate you shouting out the new event on the recent show. Monster Fest 2 is coming up in June, the 28th and 29th of 2024 in Canton, Ohio. We've started to announce guests for that. I'm doing the writing and narrating of a series entitled Sasquatch Unearthed, and the second episode of that just hit YouTube today, as a matter of fact.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, so I've usually got something going with that, and it'll soon be the 10th anniversary of Small Town Monsters, and I think, as far as I'm aware, I'll be writing sort of a short history of that. That will also be available at smalltownmonsters.com. And I also record my little Spotify for Podcasters podcast, Monster Study Group. That sort of goes in waves when I'm not doing other things.
Excellent. Well, there should be links to everything in the show notes to what Mark's up to, and I'll make sure for this episode especially, there's a link to your Twitter Anthony, I want to thank you both for doing this. A long time coming, but let's plan to do another Ultraman episode at some point. Maybe not even wait until next Kaijuly. Let's do some more Ultraman talk. What do you think?
Whoa, stop it, Derek. Don't twist my arm anymore. No. I'm thinking you.
All right, well, Anthony's out, but Mark, you want to do it?
Yeah.
Of course, big thanks to Mark and Anthony for being part of the show this week. Really appreciate them taking the time and working with me to make this happen. You know, with Skype being the way that it is and us being in different time zones, it's just sometimes the coordination of making these kinds of recordings possible is difficult. I want to say thank you to Anthony and Mark for bearing with me and bearing with the technology that Skype, is, and making this recording happen. I had a blast, and I hope you did too. I'd love to know what your favorite Ultraman Kaiju are, though, so please drop me an email at monsterkidradio@gmail.com or call and leave me a voicemail at 360-524-2484, and we'll talk about your favorite Kaiju on an upcoming episode of Monster Kid Radio. I did get just a little bit of feedback. This was actually through Facebook, and I want to read this message. This came in from Bryan Clark. This is in reference to the last episode of Monster Kid Radio. Really enjoyed that episode. Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla is one of my absolute favorite Godzilla flicks. I remember I was school clothes shopping with my mom one summer, and as we were leaving the mall, I saw that magnificent Basil Gogos poster and begged her to let us stay in town and go to the movie. My mom is awesome, so we did, and I still vividly remember that experience. Bryan, thanks for writing in and letting me know that and sharing that with us. Actually, that's really, really cool. I talked about my experience with Godzilla movies a couple of times here on the show. I'm not going to get into it again, but that's just awesome. And that's one of the things that I love about Monster Kid Radio is just kind of sharing the experiences that we have with these movies, these touchstones in our lives that coincide with the viewing and consumption of these classic or not so classic monster movies. So thanks for sharing that. And I wanted to share that with everybody here because Bryan Clark is actually going to be on the show next week. You know the segue? Yeah, you like that? It's like I've been doing this for a little while. Bryan's going to be on the show next week. We're going to be talking about a movie that I've talked about in the past, and I'm excited to get back to it because it's just one of my absolute favorites. Frankenstein Conquers the World from 1966, kinda? I mean, it was released in Japan earlier, but it's a great film. I can't wait to talk about it again with Bryan next week on the show, so just stay tuned for that. You can find out everything you need to know about Monster Kid Radio, including that feedback contact information that I mentioned a second ago, over on our website at monsterkidradio.net. You're going to find links to everything that I've talked about. You're going to find links to our Facebook page, our Facebook group, our Twitter, our Discord, our Reddit, and our Patreon. And you're going to find our Amazon affiliate links. So if you're considering shopping on Amazon, please consider using the Amazon affiliate link because every time you do, it doesn't cost you anything extra. It just shaves a penny or two off the top and takes it out of Jeff Bezos' hands and puts it into mine, and it helps support Monster Kid Radio. Easiest way you can support MKR is just doing what you normally do. Just use our Amazon affiliate link when you do it. Please consider using that. And again, thank you for retweeting tweets, sharing posts on Facebook, and just spreading the word. Let people know about Ultraman, Kaiju stuff, Godzilla, Frankenstein, Conquers the World, everything we're talking about here on the show. Just tell them this is where you're going to find it. Right here on Monster Kid Radio at monsterkidradio.net. Until next week, remember that Monster Kid Radio is a registered service mark of Monster Kid Radio LLC. All original content of Monster Kid Radio by Monster Kid Radio LLC is licensed under a Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, No Derivatives 3.0 unported license. Of course, that doesn't apply to the song Damage Report. That is copyright 2019 by the band Strange Waters. You can find it on their self-titled album, Strange Waters. You can download the album over at strangewaters.bandcamp.com. Let them know that Monster Kid Radio sent you. My name's Derek M. Cook. I'll talk to everybody next week. Ciao.